Thing about my husband is that he notices things other people don't. Not in an obvious way. He doesn't announce it, doesn't make a production of it. He just gets quiet. And when he gets quiet in a specific way, I've learned to pay attention. He got quiet at my father's 62nd birthday dinner. It was a Saturday in late April. My mom had spent 2 days cooking pot roast, the mashed potatoes my dad likes with too much butter, a chocolate cake from a recipe she's been making since before I was born. My aunt had driven up from Richmond. My uncle flew in from Denver. It was the kind of gathering that takes months to coordinate and then happens in a blur of hugs and overlapping conversations and someone always forgetting to take a picture until the cake is already half gone. My brother was there. He'd driven in the night before and slept in his old room, and when I came downstairs that morning, he was already at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, looking out the window at the backyard like he was trying to memorize something about it. "Big day," I said. He smiled. "Yeah." That was it. I didn't think anything of it at the time. My brother has always been a little quieter than the rest of us. Thoughtful, my mom calls it. He processes things internally, holds things close. I've always admired that about him, actually, because I am not like that at all. I talk when I'm nervous. I feel silence. He sits inside it like it's comfortable. His name is Nate. He's 4 years older than me, which made him 31 that April. He works, or we believed he worked, in corporate finance. That's what he'd told us 3 years earlier when he left Chicago and moved to Seattle, a financial consulting firm, he'd said. Good salary, interesting work, lots of travel. Our parents had been proud. My dad especially. He'd worked in insurance for 30 years, the kind of steady, unglamorous work that kept the lights on and put 2 kids through college. And he had always quietly hoped that one of us would do something that felt a little more like a rival. Nate seemed to be that person. My husband's name is Cade. We've been married 4 years. He works as a forensic accountant, which is a job I describe to people as financial detective work, because that's essentially what it is. He follows money, finds inconsistencies, figures out where things don't line up. He's good at it in the way that some people are good at puzzles, which is to say it comes naturally to him, and he sometimes does it without meaning to. I noticed him get quiet about 40 minutes into dinner. We were all at the big table my parents only set up for holidays and birthdays, the one that requires the extra leaf from the garage and the folding chairs from the basement. My dad was at the head, wearing the paper crown my niece had made him. My mom was up and down from the kitchen. My aunt was telling a story about her neighbor's dog. It was loud in the best way. The way family dinners are loud when everyone is actually happy to be there. Nate was talking about Seattle. Someone had asked, I think it was my uncle, how the job was going. Really good, Nate said. We just closed a deal with a logistics company out of Portland. Took about 8 months to structure. Feels good to have it done. How many people on your team now? My uncle asked. Varies by project. Right now, 4 of us on this one. I was watching my dad's face while Nate talked. My dad had this expression he gets when he's proud of something. Not showy, just settled. Like he can exhale. He had that expression. That's when I noticed Cade. He was cutting his pot roast. He hadn't said anything in a few minutes, which wasn't unusual. He tends to listen more than he talks at family gatherings. But there was something in the set of his jaw, a stillness that I recognized. He felt me looking at him and glanced over. I raised my eyebrows slightly, the way you do with your spouse across a table when you want to ask something without asking it. He gave a small, almost imperceptible shake of his head. Not now. I let it go. After dinner, after the cake and the candles and my dad's slightly embarrassed smile when we all sang to him, after my niece fell asleep on the couch and my aunt started talking about the drive back to Richmond, Cade found me in the kitchen while I was wrapping up leftovers. He stood next to me at the counter. He didn't say anything for a moment. Tell me, I said. He picked up a dish towel, folded it once, set it down. Has Nate ever talked to you about the specifics of his work? The firm? Names? Clients? Anything like that? Not really. He keeps word pretty separate. Why? Cade was quiet for another moment. Some of what he was describing tonight, the deal structure, the timeline, the way he talked about billing cycles, it didn't quite fit the way those engagements actually work. The language was slightly off. I stared at him. What do you mean, slightly off? I mean the way someone talks about an industry when they've read about it versus when they've worked in it for years. The vocabulary is close, but the texture is different. Cade. Cade. I know. You're saying my brother is lying about his job. He looked at me carefully. I'm saying something didn't add up. That's all I'm saying. I wanted to tell him he was wrong. That's my first instinct when someone suggests something uncomfortable about someone I love. Push back. Find the alternative explanation. Protect the version of the story I'm used to. Nate has been the steady one, the responsible one, the one who graduated on time, who moved to a real city, who had a plan. That's who he was in the story our family told about itself. But I also know my husband, and I know that when he says something didn't add up, it's not a casual observation. I didn't sleep well that night. I lay in the dark in my old bedroom. We'd stayed over so my dad wouldn't have to say goodbye to everyone at once. And I listened to the house settle around me. I could hear my brother down the hall. I thought about all the times he talked about Seattle over the past 3 years. The apartment in Capitol Hill, the coffee he liked from a place near his office, the work trips to San Francisco, to Boston, to Austin. He'd sent photos sometimes, himself at what looked like conferences, himself at dealers' terminals, himself at dealers that looked like client dinners. He'd sent photos, and I'd never once asked to see the name of his firm on a business card, or looked it up, or asked questions that required specific answers. None of us had. The next morning, my parents were still in bed when I came downstairs. My brother was in the kitchen again, same chair, same window, same posture as the morning before, but his coffee cup was empty and he wasn't refilling it. I sat across from him. For a long time, neither of us said anything. A bird moved somewhere in the oak tree outside. A car passed on the street. You're doing that thing, my brother said finally without looking at me. What thing? The thing where you have something to say and you're trying to figure out how to say it. I put my hands around my own coffee cup. Nate. He turned and looked at me. And I don't know how to describe what I saw in his face except to say that something in it gave way. Just slightly. Like a door that had been locked for a very long time, swinging open just an inch. How long? I asked. He didn't pretend not to understand. That told me everything. He looked back at the window. About 2.5 years. My chest went tight. 2.5 years since what? Since I left the firm. He said it quietly, like he was confessing something in a church. The original firm. The one I actually worked at when I first moved to Seattle. You left and then. And then I told everyone I hadn't. I sat with that for a moment. The kitchen was very quiet. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, another car passed. What happened? I said. He exhaled slowly. It wasn't working. The job, the fit. I was good at the technical parts, but I hated the actual work. The clients, the hours, the whole culture of it. I stuck it out for about 18 months, and then I left. I didn't have anything else lined up. I thought I'd take a month, figure out my next move, and just not mention it until I had something to tell. But a month turned into longer. Yeah. His voice was flat and careful, the way people talk when they're trying to hold emotion at a distance. I did some contract work. Nothing consistent. I lived off savings for a while. I got a part-time job at a restaurant. I told myself it was temporary. I told myself I was figuring it out, and meanwhile, every time I talked to mom or dad, I just kept maintaining the other story. because it was easier than having the real conversation, and then it had been going on long enough that the real conversation started to seem impossible. "What do you do now?" I asked. "Actually, right now." He was quiet for a beat. "I work at a small financial literacy nonprofit. I've been there about 7 months. It's not what I imagined when I was 22 and telling everyone I was going to make 6 figures by 30, but—" He stopped. "I actually like it. I'm good at it. I help people understand their credit, their debt, their budgets. It feels real in a way the other work never did." I looked at him for a long time. My brother, who I had always believed was the one who had it together, who I'd privately compared myself to when I felt like I was falling behind, who my father had described at this very dinner table as the one I don't have to worry about. "Does the nonprofit know," I started, "that I left my last job under better circumstances than I've been describing? No, my resume has gaps I've filled in ways that aren't entirely accurate." He finally looked at me. "I know how that sounds." Nate, I know." "The savings you were living on, how much?" He shook his head. "Enough that I'm not in trouble, but not much left. Dad's been talking about your career at every family dinner for 3 years. He talked about you to the guys at his poker night. He told our aunt you were one of the top performers at your firm." My brother flinched. It was small, but I saw it. "I know," he said again. And this time, his voice had something in it that was different. Not just flat, not just careful. Something that sounded like a person who has been carrying something very heavy for a very long time and is almost too tired to keep pretending it isn't heavy. I thought about my dad's face the night before, that settled, exhaling expression. I thought about the chocolate cake and the paper crown and 30 years of steady, unglamorous work. "You have to tell them," I said. "I know." "Not someday, this weekend." He nodded slowly. He didn't argue with me. He didn't make excuses or ask me to give him more time. He just nodded, and I understood that he'd probably known this moment was coming for longer than I'd been awake worrying about it. I left the kitchen before my parents came downstairs. I went upstairs and sat on the edge of the bed and told Cade what my brother had told me. Cade listened without interrupting, which is one of the things about him I have always been grateful for. "Is he okay?" he asked when I was done. "I think so. I think he will be." "And you?" "I've thought about it. I don't know yet." What I felt in that moment was not anger. I want to be honest about that, because I think there's an expectation that you're supposed to feel betrayed when someone you love has been lying to you for years, and I'm sure that would come later. I'm sure I would have to sit with it. But in that particular moment, what I felt was something closer to grief. Grief for the image I'd had of my brother. Grief for how long he'd been alone with this. And something else, something that surprised me, something that felt almost like recognition, like maybe I understood at least a little what it is to have told a story about yourself for so long that the correction begins to seem more impossible than the lie. That afternoon, Nate sat down with my parents at the kitchen table. My mom had just come in from the garden. My dad was watching golf in the living room and came in when she called him, still holding the remote. The way he does when he doesn't know yet that whatever comes next is going to matter. I was not in the room. That was Nate's decision, and I think it was the right one. Some conversations need to happen without witnesses. I sat on the back porch and listened to the wind in the oak tree and tried not to watch the clock. It was about 40 minutes. When my mom came to the back door, her eyes were red. She sat down next to me in the other porch chair and didn't say anything for a moment. She reached over and put her hand over mine. "Did you know?" she asked. "Since this morning." She nodded. She was quiet for another moment. The wind moved through the yard. "He thought we'd be ashamed of him," she said. "I know. We're not." Her voice was very steady when she said it, the way she gets when she is absolutely certain about something. "We are not." A few minutes later, my dad came out too. He sat in the yard on the old wooden bench he built 20 years ago that we keep meaning to replace and never do. He sat there with his hands on his knees and his face toward the tree line, and he was quiet for a long time. Eventually, I went and sat next to him. He didn't look at me. "How long did you say you've known?" "Since this morning." He nodded. He picked at a splinter on the bench. "He's working at a nonprofit now?" "Yeah, helping people with financial literacy. Budgets, credit, debt. He says he likes it." My dad was quiet for another moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough in a way I'm not used to hearing from him. "You know what I was most scared of when I was working those 30 years? It wasn't the money, it wasn't the job. It was that one of you kids would feel like you couldn't come to me." He shook his head. "That's the part that hurts. Not that he left a job, not that he didn't make the salary he talked about, that he spent 2.5 years not knowing he could just call me." I didn't have anything to say to that. I just sat there next to him on the bench. That's too old to be structural anymore, but too full of history to throw away. That evening, my brother and my dad sat on that same bench for about an hour. I watched them from the kitchen window while I helped my mom with dinner. Not eavesdropping, just watching. Watching the way my dad leaned forward with his elbows on his knees when he was listening. Watching my brother's posture change very gradually over the course of the conversation. The slow unclenching of something that had been held tight for years. At some point, my dad put his hand on my brother's shoulder, left it there for a moment. My brother put his own hand briefly over my dad's, and then they both looked back toward the yard. I had to look away. At dinner, nobody talked about any of it directly. We talked about my niece's soccer season and whether the back fence needed replacing and what my aunt had thought of the new restaurant on the square. We were in some ways a very ordinary family around an ordinary table on an ordinary Sunday evening. But something was different. I could feel it in the quality of the quiet between sentences, not the tight-held quality I'd felt the night before when I lay awake in the dark. Something looser, something that had been set down. Kay drove us home that night. It was dark by the time we left, the kind of spring dark that still has some warmth in it. The stars coming up over the highway in a way that looks almost intentional. I looked out the window for a long time. "You okay?" Kate asked. "Yeah," I said. "And then, why did you say something to me, instead of just letting it go?" He thought about it. "Because I kept thinking about what it would mean if nobody said anything. If he just kept carrying it. It might have been easier." "For a while," he said. I thought about my brother sitting at the kitchen table in the early morning with an empty coffee cup and a window full of backyard. I thought about 2.5 years of maintained story, of curated phone calls, of photos sent from airports to people who loved you and asked no questions because they trusted you completely. I thought about how heavy that must have been, how relentlessly heavy every single day. "I think he knew it was ending," I said. "I think part of him wanted it to end. He just didn't know how." Cade nodded. He didn't say anything else. He didn't need to. A few weeks later, my brother called me from Seattle. It was a Tuesday afternoon, mid-May, the kind of day that's already warm by 10 in the morning. "I talked to HR at the nonprofit," he said, "about the gaps in my resume. I told them the full version." My heart clenched. And they appreciated the transparency." He paused. "They're keeping me on. My manager said, she said she'd rather know she has someone who's dealt with something real than someone performing a version of their life." I sat down on my couch. "Nate." "Yeah?" "I'm really glad you're okay." "I know," he said. And this time, the way he said it was different from all the other times I'd heard him say it that weekend. This time it sounded like something he actually believed. That night I told Cade about the phone call, and he listened in that way he has, attentive and quiet. And when I was done, he said, "Good." Just that, good. Which is, in the end, what it was. My brother still works at the nonprofit. He called me last month to say they'd offered him a full-time role with benefits and that he'd accepted and that he'd also told our parents. My dad texted me after, just a thumbs up emoji, which sounds insignificant until you know my dad, who texts like someone who learned to use a phone last Tuesday and finds the whole enterprise faintly suspicious. The thumbs up was everything. I've thought a lot, in the months since that birthday weekend, about what it costs to hold a secret of that size. Not a secret born of malice. My brother never set out to deceive anyone. Not really. He set out to protect himself from a conversation he was afraid of, and 1 month of silence became 3, became a year, became 2.5 years of living inside something that had grown too large to see around. I've thought about what it would have cost him if nobody had said anything, if Kate hadn't gotten quiet in that specific way I've learned to notice. If I'd gone back to sleep instead of sitting across from my brother in that kitchen. I don't say this to make myself the hero of the story, because I'm not. My brother is. He's the one who sat down at that kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon and said the true thing out loud to the people it was hardest to say it to, without knowing how they would respond. That's not nothing. That's actually everything. Some people never get there. Some people choose the story over the truth for the rest of their lives, and the story slowly becomes more expensive than anything they originally set out to protect. My brother got lucky in the specific way that comes from having people who respond to hard news with something other than fury and withdrawal. My dad is not a man who talks about love as a concept. He talks about showing up, about doing the thing, about keeping your word. But I think what he did on that bench on that Sunday afternoon in April was an act of love as pure as anything I've ever witnessed. He could have made my brother feel smaller for what he'd hidden. He chose to make him feel held instead. I don't know if I would have done that as well, given the chance. I hope so. I like to think I would. But I watched it happen, and it stays with me. The image of my dad with his hand on my brother's shoulder, both of them looking out at the same yard, the oak tree moving just slightly in the wind, the evening coming down slow and quiet around them. That image is not a complicated one, but it's the true one, and the true ones are the only ones that stay. The image I keep coming back to is my dad on that old bench he built 20 years ago, the one we keep meaning to replace and never do, with his hand on my brother's shoulder. Neither of them talking, just sitting there in the evening quiet, looking out at the same yard they both looked at for decades. That image doesn't have a lesson printed underneath it. But it contains one, if you're willing to sit with it long enough. What my brother did, hiding for 2.5 years, wasn't cruelty. It was fear. He'd made one choice, not to say something, and then the weight of that silence compounded every single month until the truth felt more dangerous than the lie. That's how it works. Not all at once, but gradually, the way a small leak becomes a flood when nobody fixes it in time. Cause, then consequence, then a consequence of that consequence. By the time Nate sat across from me at that kitchen table, he wasn't just carrying one secret. He was carrying the architecture of a whole alternate life he built to protect the first one. I don't say this to excuse it. I say it because I think understanding how something happens is different from condoning it, and the understanding matters if you actually want to help someone. What my husband did, noticing, saying something to me quietly instead of looking away, was an act of clear thinking at a moment when it would have been much easier to stay comfortable. He didn't make accusations. He didn't confront my brother at the dinner table. He paid attention, held what he observed carefully, and brought it to me without drama. That kind of thinking, precise, patient, honest, is rarer than people realize. It requires a person to trust what they see, even when what they see is inconvenient. And what my brother ultimately did, sitting down with my parents on a Sunday afternoon without knowing how it would end, was something that took more courage than anything on his resume ever had, real or invented. The hardest thing most of us will ever do is say a true and costly thing to someone whose opinion of us actually matters. Nate did that. He could have kept going. He could have gotten in his car and driven back to Seattle and maintained the story for another year, another two. He didn't. He chose the harder, realer thing. That choice cost him something, and it gave him something back that was worth more. I've thought about what each of them modeled without meaning to. My dad, who responded to betrayal with steadiness instead of fury, that's not passivity, that's character. My husband, who trusted his own judgment when it pointed somewhere uncomfortable, that's integrity working quietly. My brother, who finally chose honesty over self-protection after years of choosing the other way. That's what it looks like when someone decides to stop running. None of them are perfect, neither am I, but I watched three people I love do the right thing in a hard moment, each in their own way, and I think that stays with you. The bench is still in the backyard. My dad still hasn't replaced it. I hope he never does.